resort rises out of the jungle like a promise that was never kept. White concrete balconies face the ocean in perfect rows. A ballroom stretches wider than a cathedral nave, its chandeliers still wrapped in protective plastic. There are 350 rooms, each with furniture arranged by workers who left decades ago. But no one has ever slept here. No laughter ever filled the pools. No music ever echoed beneath those chandeliers. For nearly 60 years this building waited, perfectly prepared, perfectly silent. Explorers who entered after dark describe hearing doors close behind them in rhythm, footsteps matching their pace down empty corridors, voices speaking their names in rooms they had not yet entered. Cameras fail within minutes of crossing the threshold. Batteries drain without warning. And every witness, Homer across 5 decades, reports the same sensation. The hotel is not abandoned. It is occupied. It has been waiting, and it does not want to be alone anymore. The foundation. The island of Hachijojima sits 200 miles south of Tokyo, volcanic and isolated, surrounded by black rock shores and dense subtropical forest. For centuries, it served as a place of exile, where the unwanted were sent to disappear. In 1963, developers believed they could transform that history into destiny. Japan was rebuilding itself. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics approached like a deadline for the entire nation. Post-war shame would be replaced by modern spectacle. Cities competed to prove their transformation was complete, and on Hachijojima, a consortium of investors decided to build something impossible. In the Hachijo Royal Hotel would be the largest resort in the Pacific. 350 rooms, 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, a grand ballroom designed to hold 3,000 guests beneath a dome of imported Italian crystal. The budget exceeded $100 million, an astronomical sum for a single structure on an island with fewer than 10,000 residents. The architectural plans reveal the ambition. Every corridor calculated for constant movement, every stairwell designed for flow and echo. The ballroom acoustics were engineered to carry a whisper from the stage to the furthest balcony. This was not a hotel. It was a machine designed to process human presence at scale. Construction began in January of 1963. Workers poured concrete in shifts that ran through the night. The foundation alone required 8 months. Electrical systems were installed by teams flown in from Tokyo. Plumbing networks branched through the building like circulatory systems. By November, the structure stood complete, gleaming white against the jungle, visible from fishing boats 10 miles offshore. The developer scheduled the grand opening for March of 1964, 2 months before the Olympics. Invitations were printed. Staff were hired and trained. Linens were delivered and placed in every room. The chandeliers were hung but left wrapped, waiting for the final inspection. The inspection never came. In February of 1964, the development company declared bankruptcy. The causes were complex: cost overruns, undisclosed debts, investors withdrawing at the last moment. But the result was simple and absolute, and the hotel would not open. Not in March, not ever. Workers were told to leave their tools and return the following week for severance pay. Most never came back. The building was sealed, but not secured. Power remained connected to prevent damage to the electrical systems. Water still flowed through pipes installed to service hundreds of guests per day. And then something began. The first reports came from the construction supervisor, a man named Takeshi Yamamoto, who returned to the site 3 weeks after the bankruptcy to retrieve company equipment. According to his statement filed with the island municipal office, he arrived at dusk and found the main entrance unlocked. He assumed squatters or vandals had broken in, but inside, nothing was disturbed. Furniture sat exactly as it had been arranged. Lobby chairs faced the reception desk in perfect rows. The elevators were positioned on the ground floor, doors closed. Yamamoto walked through the building with a flashlight, checking each major room. In the grand ballroom, he stopped. The chandeliers were unwrapped. He remembered clearly that they had been left covered in protective plastic. Now they hung exposed, crystal facets catching his flashlight beam. He approached the center of the room and stood beneath the dome. That was when he heard it. Applause. Faint at first, then building, echoing from the walls as if a crowd surrounded him. He spun, searching for the source. The ballroom was empty. The sound continued for 10 seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it began. Yamamoto left immediately. He reported the incident to his supervisor, who dismissed it as exhaustion or stress. But 2 days later, a municipal inspector visited the site to assess the property for potential sale. He reported identical phenomenon: applause in the ballroom, doors that had been closed now standing open, and a persistent sensation of being watched from the upper floors. The island government sealed the building officially in May of 1964. Locks were installed, warning signs posted, but the power was never disconnected. The reasoning in the municipal records is unclear. Some documents cite concerns about damage to the electrical infrastructure. Others mention plans for eventual renovation. The building remained energized, lights burning in empty hallways, air conditioning systems cycling through vacant rooms, a hotel designed for thousands, powered and waiting, with no one inside, except the workers who had left reported something else. In the final weeks of construction, several men claimed to hear activity at night. Footsteps on floors above them, doors closing in rhythm down long corridors. One electrician reported hearing his name called from an empty elevator shaft. At the time, these reports were dismissed as jokes or fatigue. Construction sites breed strange sounds. Crews working in isolation develop nervous habits. But after the building was sealed, after the bankruptcy and the evacuation, a pattern emerged. The hotel had been active before it was abandoned. It had been listening before it was left alone. And now, with no opening ceremony to fulfill its purpose, with no guests to fill its rooms, the building did not go silent. It began to wait. The pattern emerges. For 20 years after its closure, the Hachijo Royal Hotel existed in a state of eerie preservation. Jungle growth crept toward its walls, but never seemed to reach the foundation. Salt air from the ocean corroded metal on nearby structures, but left the hotel's balconies strangely untouched. Locals developed an unspoken agreement. The building was avoided, particularly after sunset. But avoidance is not the same as absence, and the hotel did not remain unvisited. In 1978, a group of fishermen sheltering from a sudden storm broke into the ground floor through a service entrance. According to their account given to island police 3 days later, they intended only to wait out the weather. They built a small fire in the loading area and prepared to spend the night. Within an hour, they heard footsteps. Not the random creaking of an old building, but deliberate paced steps moving along the corridor above them. The footsteps would start at one end of the hallway, walk its full length, then pause, then return in the opposite direction, back and forth, consistent as a metronome. One fisherman went to investigate. He climbed the service stairs to the first-floor guest corridor and found it empty. The moment he stepped into the hallway, the footsteps stopped. He waited in silence for 30 seconds. Then, from the far end of the corridor, they began again, walking toward him. He ran. All 4 men abandoned the building and spent the night in the storm outside. When questioned, they insisted the footsteps were not random. They were pacing, systematic, as if something was patrolling. This account was filed and forgotten until 1983, when an urban explorer from Tokyo published a photography book documenting abandoned structures across Japan. The Hachijo Royal Hotel occupied an entire chapter. His photographs showed the ballroom with its chandeliers still hanging, guest rooms with beds made and waiting, hallways extending into shadow. But his written account was more disturbing than his images. He described entering the building at noon, choosing daylight deliberately to avoid the folklore. He spent 6 hours photographing the ground floor and ballroom without incident. At dusk, he moved to the upper floors. On the 4th floor west wing, he began experiencing technical failures. His camera, a professional model with fresh batteries, died between shots. He replaced the batteries. It died again within 2 minutes. He switched to his backup camera. Same result. In total, he replaced batteries 7 times in the span of 15 minutes. Each set drained completely within moments of installation. Then he heard his name, not shouted, spoken clearly, as if someone stood directly behind him. He turned. The corridor was empty. He called out, assuming another explorer had entered. No response. He continued down the hallway, camera hanging useless around his neck. The voice came again, his name, closer this time, and beneath it, a sound like furniture being moved, heavy objects dragging across the floor. The sound came from the ballroom, 3 floors below him. He descended quickly, adrenaline overriding his unease. The ballroom was unchanged. Every chair, every table, every chandelier exactly as he had photographed them hours earlier. But the sound continued, scraping, dragging, coming from everywhere and nowhere. He left. His book, published by a small press in Tokyo, sold poorly. But investigators would later retrieve his account and compare it to dozens of others. The pattern was undeniable. The building responded to presence. Not immediately, but with a delay, as if observing before acting. Phenomena clustered in specific locations: the 4th floor west wing corridor, the grand ballroom beneath the dome, the central stairwell connecting all 7 floors. These were the spaces designed for crowds, for movement and density, and in their emptiness, they had become something else. Municipal maintenance logs from 1984 through 1992 document a series of unexplained events. Inspectors required to assess the building for potential demolition reported identical experiences. Lights switching on as they entered rooms. Doors closing behind them with no draft or mechanism. Elevator call buttons illuminating on floors they had not visited. Most disturbing were the power surges. The hotel had been disconnected from the island's electrical grid in 1986 due to safety concerns. Yet inspectors continued to report lights functioning, air conditioning running, elevators positioned as if recently used. Electrical engineers were brought in. They confirmed no external power source. They tested the building's backup generators and found them non-functional, fuel tanks empty. The power had no origin. Yet it persisted. One engineer, in a report filed with the municipal archives, offered a theory. He suggested the building's electrical system had been designed with such redundancy, such over-engineered capacity, and that residual charge might persist in the wiring itself, a kind of electrical haunting, stored energy with nowhere to dissipate. His theory was reviewed and quietly rejected. Residual charge does not last decades. It does not activate systems selectively, and it does not respond to human presence. By the mid-1990s, the hotel had acquired a reputation beyond the island. Urban exploration forums mentioned it in whispered terms. A few attempted overnight investigations. Most left within hours. Those who stayed until dawn reported the same phenomenon. The building was most active between midnight and 4 in the morning. Sounds of occupancy, doors opening and closing in sequence, voices echoing from the ballroom, and always the footsteps, pacing the corridors, matching the speed of anyone who walked the halls. One investigator, a woman named Keiko Sato, who specialized in documenting abandoned architecture, spent 3 nights in the hotel in 1997. Her audio recordings, archived on an early paranormal research website, capture something extraordinary. On the second night, she placed audio recorders in 5 locations: the ballroom, the 4th floor west corridor, the lobby, the central stairwell, and her base camp in a ground floor conference room. At 1:37 in the morning, all 5 recorders captured the same sound: applause, building from silence to a sustained crescendo lasting 43 seconds, then stopping simultaneously across all locations. Sato's notes describe her reaction. She was awake when it happened, sitting in the conference room. She heard the applause through the walls, echoing from deeper in the building. She went to the ballroom, empty, silent. She checked her recorders the next morning and found the sound on every device. But there was something else on the recordings. Beneath the applause, barely audible, a rhythmic tapping. Deliberate, Morse code, one researcher later suggested. But no one has definitively translated it. Sato's final note is brief. The building is not passive, it performs. In 2001, the municipal government commissioned a formal assessment to determine if the hotel could be safely demolished or renovated. The assessment team included structural engineers, environmental consultants, and a cultural historian to document the site before its potential destruction. The team spent 2 weeks on site. Their official report is largely technical: concrete degradation, asbestos presence, structural integrity compromised by decades of neglect. But an addendum, written by the lead engineer and later leaked to paranormal research communities, describes something else. The team experienced coordinated phenomena: doors closing simultaneously on multiple floors, lights activating in rooms moments before team members entered, and on their final night, something that defied all conventional explanation. The entire team, 12 people, were conducting a final survey of the upper floors. They split into groups of 3, each taking a different wing. At approximately 9:15 in the evening, all 4 groups reported hearing footsteps, not from another group, from above, on the 7th floor, which should have been sealed. They converged on the central stairwell and ascended together. The 7th floor was dark, and doors locked as they had been since the building's closure. But the footsteps continued, moving along the corridor, stopping at each door, then continuing. The team stood in the stairwell and listened. The footsteps approached, closer, right to the stairwell entrance, then stopped. No one appeared. The corridor remained empty, but every person present described the same sensation. They were being examined, assessed. The building was deciding something. After 30 seconds of silence, the footsteps resumed, moving away, down the corridor, fading into distance. The team left the following morning. The assessment was filed with a recommendation for immediate demolition, but the recommendation would not be acted upon for another 20 years. The hotel waited, and the phenomena intensified. The peak horror. In 2004, a Japanese urban exploration collective called Hachijojima Ventures organized the most comprehensive investigation of the Hachijo Royal Hotel ever attempted. 6 investigators, 72 hours, complete documentation. Their intention was to debunk the folklore, to prove that the hotel's reputation was built on misunderstanding, environmental factors, and the psychology of isolation. They brought thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, structural vibration sensors, and over 40 hours of recording capacity. They entered the building at noon on a Friday in October. By Sunday morning, 3 members of the team had left. The remaining 3 departed at dawn. Their footage, partially uploaded to a now-defunct website and preserved in paranormal research archives, documents something that cannot be explained by environmental factors. The first day proceeded without major incident. The team mapped the building floor by floor, placing sensors and cameras in key locations: the ballroom, the 4th floor west wing, the central stairwell. They noted the electrical anomalies previous investigators had reported: lights functioning with no power source, elevators positioned as if recently used. One investigator, a man named Hiroshi Tanaka, attempted to trace the electrical pathways. He opened junction boxes and found wiring that appeared active, humming faintly with current. His electromagnetic field detector spiked near certain outlets. But when he tested the outlets directly, they showed no voltage. The energy was present, but inaccessible, flowing through the building's nervous system without source or destination. That night, the team set up base camp in the lobby and began monitoring their remote cameras. At 11:47, the camera positioned in the ballroom registered movement. The team reviewed the footage immediately. A chandelier was swaying, not from wind or vibration, a deliberate rhythmic swing. As they watched, a second chandelier began moving, then a third. Within 2 minutes, all 12 chandeliers beneath the dome were swaying in unison. Perfect synchronization. The team went to the ballroom. By the time they arrived, the chandeliers had stopped. They examined the mounting points and found no mechanical explanation. No breeze, no seismic activity. The chandeliers hung motionless as if they had never moved. At 1:15 in the morning, the audio recorders placed throughout the building simultaneously captured footsteps, not in one location, in all of them. The ballroom, the corridors, the stairwells, footsteps walking in rhythm across 7 floors. One investigator suggested they were hearing echoes of their own movements, somehow delayed and amplified by the building's acoustics, but the team had been stationary for 20 minutes, and the footsteps did not match any of their earlier paths. At 2:30, the phenomena escalated. The team was in the lobby when they heard a door close, not nearby, distant, deep in the building. Then another door, closer, then another. A sequence of closures approaching from the west wing. Door after door, rhythmic, deliberate. The team counted. 27 doors closing in sequence. The sound traveled down the 4th floor corridor, reached the central stairwell, and stopped. They went to investigate. Tanaka led the group up the stairs to the 4th floor west wing. He pushed open the stairwell door and stepped into the corridor. Every door was closed. The hallway extended 40 meters, doors lining both sides. 28 rooms total. He began walking, checking each door, all locked, all sealed as they had been since the building's closure. Halfway down the corridor, Tanaka stopped. The investigator behind him, a woman named Yuki Matsumoto, asked what was wrong. Tanaka did not respond. He stood motionless, staring at the far end of the hallway. Matsumoto moved beside him. She saw it too. A figure, standing at the corridor's terminus, indistinct, shadow or silhouette, not moving. The team's cameras were recording. The footage shows the corridor, empty. But Tanaka and Matsumoto both insisted they saw someone. For 7 seconds, they watched the figure. Then it was gone. Not walking away, simply absent. Tanaka continued forward. He reached the spot where the figure had stood. Nothing. But the temperature had dropped. His breath misted in the air. The thermal camera registered a localized cold spot, 15 degrees colder than the surrounding corridor. No environmental cause. The team retreated to the lobby. They reviewed their footage and audio. The recordings were corrupted, static and interference precisely at the moments of highest activity. The chandelier movement, the sequential doors, the figure in the corridor, all obscured by noise. At 4 a.m, 3 team members decided to leave. They cited equipment failure and exhaustion. The remaining 3, including Tanaka, elected to stay. They believed they were close to documenting something definitive. The second night, they focused on the ballroom. If the building was most active there, they would force a response. They set up every functioning camera in a perimeter around the room. They positioned audio recorders beneath the dome. And at midnight, Tanaka stood in the center of the ballroom and spoke aloud. He addressed the building directly, asked what it wanted, why it responded to presence, what had happened here. For 10 minutes, silence. Then, from the balcony level, footsteps, walking along the upper tier, circling the room. The team's cameras tracked the sound, but captured nothing visible. The footsteps continued for 3 minutes, then stopped. Tanaka asked again, "Who are you?" The response was immediate. Applause, starting from the balcony and spreading downward, building to a thunderous ovation. The team stood in the center of the ballroom as the sound surrounded them. It lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds, then silence. One investigator, a man named Kenji Ito, began to cry. He would later describe the sensation. The applause was not random. It was responsive, acknowledging, as if the building was grateful to finally be heard. The team attempted to leave the ballroom. The doors were locked, not mechanically jammed, locked as if engaged from the outside. Tanaka pulled. Nothing. Matsumoto tried the secondary exit. Same result. All 4 ballroom exits had sealed simultaneously. Panic set in. Ito began shouting, demanding release. The building responded. The chandeliers began swaying again, faster this time. Violent arcs, its crystal facets chimed as they collided. The team huddled in the center of the room. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. The team activated flashlights. In the beams, they saw the doors swing open. All 4, simultaneously. Invitation or dismissal. They ran, out of the ballroom, through the lobby, into the jungle night. Behind them, the hotel stood silent, lights burning in empty windows, waiting. The team's footage was partially recovered. The applause is audible. The chandelier movement is documented. But the locked doors, the figure in the corridor, the precise coordination of phenomena across multiple locations cannot be explained by conventional means. In 2005, a Shinto priest was invited to perform a cleansing ritual. He entered the building at dawn, alone, carrying ceremonial implements. He focused his efforts on the ballroom and the 4th floor corridor. The ritual lasted 3 hours. When asked afterward if he believed the hotel was haunted, the priest's response was carefully phrased. "The building is not occupied by spirits of the dead. It is occupied by its own unfulfilled purpose. A structure designed to hold thousands, left empty, does not simply decay. It hungers." The cleansing had no effect. Investigators who entered the hotel after the ritual reported identical phenomena: footsteps, doors, voices, applause. The building had not been appeased. It had been acknowledged, and it remembered. The legacy and unresolved terror. For 18 years after the Hachijojima Ventures investigation, the Hachijojima Royal Hotel stood untouched. The municipal government debated its fate. Demolition was expensive. Renovation was impossible. Preservation was dangerous. but time and neglect accelerated. By 2020, the structure had become unstable. Concrete spalling from balconies, ceiling collapses in upper floor corridors. The decision was made. The hotel would be demolished. Work began in January of 2022. Specialized crews from Tokyo were contracted. The project was projected to take 6 months. Controlled demolition, floor by floor, standard procedure. It took 14 months, and nothing about it was standard. The first crew reported equipment malfunctions within days, hydraulic systems failing without cause, cutting torches extinguishing spontaneously, electrical tools draining batteries in minutes. The patterns were familiar to anyone who had studied the hotel's history. The building was responding. One worker, and a demolition foreman named Takeshi Kobayashi, filed a formal complaint with the contracting company in March of 2022. He described injuries among his crew, minor but persistent. Cuts from tools that had been inactive, burns from equipment that had been powered down, bruises appearing overnight with no remembered cause. All injuries were non-fatal, none severe enough to halt work, but their frequency and timing disturbed Kobayashi. The injuries clustered around the ballroom and the 4th floor west wing, the same locations that had generated reports for 60 years. In May, the ballroom was scheduled for demolition. The crew placed charges along the support columns. Standard procedure: detonate, collapse, clear debris. They evacuated the building and triggered the sequence. The charges fired, but the ballroom did not collapse, not immediately. The support columns cracked, the dome fractured, but the structure hung suspended, sagging, refusing to fall. For 43 seconds, the ballroom defied physics. Then, as if releasing a held breath, it collapsed. The debris crews entering the wreckage reported something that was never officially documented. Beneath the rubble of the dome, they found the chandeliers. All 12. Intact. Crystal facets unbroken, hanging from twisted metal frames still suspended in mid-air, as if the building had protected them until the final moment. By August, the demolition was 70% complete. Upper floors reduced to rubble. Guest wings collapsed. Only the central structure and ground floor remained. The crew prepared for the final phase. That night, our residents of Hachijojima reported seeing lights in the ruins, bright and sustained, coming from sections that had already been demolished. Municipal officials investigated and found nothing. No power source, no explanation. But the reports continued. Lights offshore, visible from fishing boats, moving along the coastline where the hotel had stood, and voices, carried on the wind, indistinct but persistent. One fisherman, a man who had lived on the island for 60 years, described the voices as applause, distant and faint, rising from the ocean as if the hotel had not been demolished, but submerged. The demolition was completed in February of 2023. The site was cleared. Vegetation began reclaiming the foundation. The government considered developing the land but found no investors. The history was too heavy. The reputation too dark. Paranormal investigators continue to visit the site. They report residual activity, cold spots where the ballroom once stood, footsteps along paths that once were corridors, and photographs, digital images showing light anomalies, orbs and streaks concentrated where the 4th floor west wing extended into jungle. In 2024, a researcher named Dr. Akiko Yamada published a paper analyzing the Hachijo Royal Hotel phenomenon. She proposed a theory. Buildings designed for specific purposes develop what she called architectural memory. The hotel had been engineered to process human presence at massive scale. Its acoustics, circulation, electrical systems, all calibrated for crowds. When that purpose was denied, the building did not become inert. It became expectant. Every system designed to serve guests instead waited for guests that never came. And in that waiting, something emerged. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but a kind of structural consciousness. The hotel had been designed to respond to presence, and after 60 years, it learned to generate presence of its own. Dr. Yamada's paper was peer-reviewed and largely dismissed. Architecture cannot develop consciousness. Buildings do not wait. Structures do not hunger. But those who entered the Hachijo Royal Hotel, those who experienced its phenomena firsthand, describe something that contradicts conventional understanding. The hotel was not passive. It did not simply echo or reflect. It anticipated. It responded. It remembered. And now, with its physical form demolished, something persists. Locals speak of it carefully. The lights offshore and the voices in the wind. The sensation, when walking near the old foundation, of being watched from spaces that no longer exist. One former demolition worker, interviewed anonymously in 2025, described his final day on site. He had been part of the crew that cleared the ballroom debris. As he worked, he felt something, not fear exactly, recognition. The building knew it was ending, he said, and it was not sad, it was relieved, like it had been holding its breath for 60 years, waiting for permission to exhale. We gave it that permission, but what it exhaled is still here, still waiting. The site remains undeveloped. Proposals surface occasionally. A memorial park, a museum, a new resort, smaller and humbler. None proceed beyond planning stages. The land remembers what stood there. And visitors, even those unfamiliar with its history, report the same unease. Something occupied the Hachijo Royal Hotel for 60 years, something that was neither human nor spirit, but emerged from the gap between design and fulfillment. A building created to consume presence, denied that purpose, learning instead to generate its own. The question that haunts researchers is not whether the hotel was haunted. The evidence, accumulated across decades, suggests something was present. The question is, what happens to a place when its entire reason for existence is denied from the moment of its creation? Can a building develop will? Can architecture hunger? Can a structure designed for celebration and occupancy, left eternally empty, become something that refuses to remain silent? The Hachijo Royal Hotel stood for 60 years. It has been demolished for 3. But the phenomena continue. The lights, the voices, the applause echoing from nothing. And on certain nights, when the wind carries sound from the ocean to the jungle, people walking near the old foundation stop and listen, because they hear footsteps, pacing along corridors that no longer exist, walking the length of hallways that have been reduced to rubble and memory. The hotel is gone, but it is still waiting, still occupied by the purpose it could never fulfill, still listening for the guests who will never arrive. And if you stand on that foundation at dusk, if you close your eyes and listen carefully, you might hear it, faint but unmistakable. Applause rising from empty ground, growing louder, as if the hotel is grateful you came, as if it has been waiting for you specifically, as if it finally has a guest to welcome. We build monuments to human ambition, towers and palaces, stadiums and resorts. We engineer them to serve specific purposes, to shelter or entertain, to house or celebrate. But what happens when that purpose is denied? When a structure is born complete, yet stillborn? When architecture designed for life is condemned to perpetual waiting? The Hachijo Royal Hotel suggests an answer that violates our understanding of the physical world. A building left unfulfilled does not simply decay. It adapts. It learns. It generates what it was designed to receive. 350 rooms prepared for guests who never came. A ballroom designed for thousands, silent for 6 decades. Corridors engineered for constant movement, walked only by investigators and the echoes of their fear. The hotel is demolished. But demolition is not the same as erasure, and some hungers, once awakened, cannot be satisfied by destruction. The lights still burn offshore. The applause still rises from empty ground. The footsteps still pace corridors that exist now only in memory and testimony. Because the Hachijo Royal Hotel was never really abandoned. It was occupied from the moment it was sealed, occupied by its own unfulfilled purpose, waiting with the patience of concrete and steel, watching with the attention of a host who has prepared everything for guests who refuse to arrive, and it is waiting still.